Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Jon Barinholtz to talk all about his latest TV series, American Auto. The first thing I actually wanted to talk about is the balance that you had to create with this character, because, he's not necessarily a quote unquote likable character, and yet he comes across very empathetic, which is a really difficult balance to create within your performance. And so when you first got the scripts and were developing him as a character, how did you set about finding that line of a character that the audience may not want to hang out with in person, but also is really interested and engaged with and empathetic towards because we understand his actions?
That's a great question, and well put. It was like that when I first got the script. I got really excited because the script is amazing, and this character specifically read like really tough on the page, like you said, like a person you wouldn't really want to hang out with. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word prick, but he felt like a prick, and I was so excited because I was like, oh, I know I can make him more sustainable than that, as like from a viewer standpoint of, oh yeah, he is a prick, but like when he walked out of scenes, you're not like, I hate that guy. You're like, I feel bad for that guy, kind of. And like that's my kind of favorite zone to play in for a character, of giving them that vulnerability and injecting a little lovability into it. It's this Wesley is one of the only characters in the show. Maybe Dory too are similar in that, like they're all id, like everything that they say. There's no filter, and it's really, I think, leaning into that for Wesley of that, like you just get you see inside his brain a little bit, and I think that's helpful for audiences to be like, well, he's not really calculating because he's almost not smart enough to be calculating, or maybe even doesn't care. He's more just who he is. And and then with this most recent episode, the fundraiser, the gala, you really see his family, how they've made him who he is. And I think it was a huge buyback for the whole season on Wesley to see that, he's really just a product of coming from a family where he was maybe like teased and a little bullied. And he's at the end of the day, he is just trying to do his best, the poor guy.
When you were working on all of that at the beginning, did it really help coming from the Justin Spitzer world, coming from Superstore, and knowing that that's kind of foundationally how he creates characters, that, you see them on the surface and then he spends the rest of the season really kind of uncovering those empathetic aspects. So was that a really useful thing in knowing how he approaches character development?
100%. That context of his previous shows was huge, right? And like there's a meeting at the beginning of the season where every cast member met with the writers individually, and we talked through like, well, what's the buyback going to be? And like different characters have different buybacks. Like Jack doesn't need a buyback because he's so sweet and charming, lovable. Wesley definitely does. Even like Katherine does. Like I'd say half the cast are vicious in their own ways, and they need kind of like this lovability factor injected in there. And it's, the character is definitely not as like warm and squishy lovable as the Superstore cast, right? Like that, those characters are all, I think you're empathizing a lot more with them. Whereas like there's definitely empathy in these characters, but it's more of like a study of what people, like normal people, are like in corporate life. So yeah, that was big, knowing that Justin was going to give that. Like there's no 100% villains in Justin Spitzer stories. Everyone has like layers that lets you have these moments of humanity where you can relate to them even if they're not your cup of tea. So that was, again, why I was so excited when I knew he was going to make the show in the first place. I was like, oh, I know exactly what he's doing, and I see it because I know what a Justin Spitzer show is.
And he also creates characters that are very distinctive on the page, but hires actors and hires cast members and wants them to really bring decisions and choices to the character as well. So with Wesley, what was that balance of the kind of key details on the page and then the things that you really found between the pages of the script that you wanted to bring into him?
Yeah. Again, it was finding that looseness where he was me. He was, I could bring as much as who I am to this character, but still keeping true to what this archetype is. And Justin's so lovely with that. And it's a dream to work with him from an acting standpoint because there's a real collaboration. It happened with Superstore where we would get a couple, takes down of what was on the page. And then specifically for outs of scenes, for like the blow lines at the end, it was, hey, let's play around. Let's try to find something. Let's go beyond when the page ends. And it's such a tightly run ship with him where you have the time to do that and the space to do that. So with Wesley, it was a matter of, really figuring it out. Like the pilots always take longer to film. So we had, I think, 10 days for that versus 5 days for a normal episode. So we had the extra time to play with of, hey, let's a few extra takes here and there where we really can just find it out. And also that trust in Justin and the other producers who are watching it on camera over in Video Village to be like, that's really playing. What you just did there is really playing. So lean into that more. And it's constantly building this roadmap that becomes less nebulous. And then you finally like get like, oh, what this character is. And then it's all house money and you're playing around and it's really fun.
And with that idea of getting to try different things, getting to try different ults, different versions of a scene, does it also help working in a multicam setting because you're not having to kind of try to recreate it necessarily as specifically, or you're not trying to play to like, okay, the camera's close up on this one because you know that it's going to be captured from a few different spaces.
So the way he shoots this is it's not hybrid. It is, we have 3 cameras on, but it's not multicam as in like they're set like, all looking one way where it's all the same angle the whole time. So it is a little bit tricky in those, knowing like, okay, I may have a great idea here to improvise a line, but the coverage isn't on me. This is going to be, Harriet's coverage or Anna's coverage. So it's that fine line between, well, I don't want to improvise in their coverage because they may have ideas, but I may want a reaction to this line. So the editors have an option to, if what I'm going to do in 3 takes when the cameras are on me work, I want to at least try it now to see their reaction because we may want their reaction. So it's a bit of Tetris, like figuring that out of, not stepping on each other's toes. And it's so weird to say because it's something like so technical and precise as camera work, but it does come down to feel in a way of, oh, I feel that there's space here where I can do this and I'm not stepping on someone's toes. And sometimes you do, sometimes you improvise some things just as someone else does. And there's that like little awkward moment, but that's the huge benefit to being on a show like this, where it's welcome and it's not as precious because we can just go ahead and do it again. But yeah, it is a little bit of like silent negotiation that has to happen in your head with that stuff.
That's so interesting to hear. And kind of off the back of that, I was interested in when you were working on the pilot, just everybody in the cast, because there are so many really great ensemble scenes in this show, and again, that's something that Justin just writes so well. Yeah. And with what you were saying about the reaction shots, it's not just about which character's at the foreground, it's about every single person, even if they're flickering onto camera for a second within a scene. And I know that you didn't get really the same FaceTime with the rest of the cast because of COVID protocols and how that's changed everything in production. And so what was it like going in and shooting the pilot and everybody trying to figure out what that silent negotiation is, what that dynamic's going to be in those ensemble scenes?
It's tough. It's tough, and it's made trickier by COVID, right? Because there isn't this like massive hangouts and dinners that happen leading up to it, which is like what Superstore was. Like we didn't have COVID, or at least for the majority of it, we didn't. So we were hanging out with each other on weekends. We knew each other's families, and like there was more of a rapport. With pilots in general, there's less of, you're meeting new people who are all hired to the same things you maybe met once or twice. And it was, I think it was like halfway through the pilot. It's just a matter of like talking to each other about it. I remember like halfway through the pilot, like me going up to Humphrey and being like, hey, how do you think we feel about each other? Like, because everything we were doing was cracking me up. Like we would have takes where like Humphrey hated me and I just kind of took it. There were takes where I was like really insulting of him and he took it. There were takes where I was insulting and he kind of fought back. And it was like, oh, well, what's the actual status here? Like, we that's like the kind of like the fun, nerdy actor thing of, I remember I posted to him and he was like, oh, it's funny. We've just been doing a bunch of fun, different things, but we haven't figured out what the thing is yet. And that's what pilots are. And that's why, typically pilots are shot well before the rest of the season. In this case, it was, almost a year before we shot the pilot. And it is still figuring it out, right? It's very much still figuring it out. So it's just communication and talking to each other as much as you can. And if you have an idea, you got to talk to like the people that you're working with and uh, in a way, even though there's that separation, we're not hanging out much outside of set because of COVID. We are way more together on set during COVID. And there's just, it's forced time, right? Which is forced connection, which is great for something like this.
I was also actually interested in the blocking of a lot of the ensemble scenes for you, because with Wesley, one of the aspects is he so desperately wants to be part of this group and part of the center, but he's never really invited in. Like if they're in an office, if they're having a conversation in Catherine's office, no one said, let's get Wesley, let's bring him into this conversation.
No.
He heard the conversation and came in. And so as a result of that, if you look at a lot of those scenes, you're very often on the outskirts of it. And so is that something that really impacts the blocking, kind of like he's the last person to come in?
Yeah, 100%. Like that's really great that you picked up on that, because it really is a thing where he's kind of like, he's a floater, right? He's on the outside, and that type of person also usually, there's like that saying, the strongest one in the room is also the most silent. And it's like, clearly, like Wesley doesn't know that, because he is, he's always fidgeting, he's always moving around, and he's always trying to interject himself because he's so nervous about the fact that deep down, he knows he doesn't have the status that he wants. But yeah, that's another really fun aspect in how I found the character even more of, if people are gathered around at the table, I'm always in the back kind of snacking and just kind of like overhearing a little bit, and I get to pop in with something. And it's one of the really fun things about that character is that he is an outsider in his own company, and his family's company.
And his job is so unidentifiable, and he comes up with different versions day to day as to what even he thinks he does. You know, the gala episode, even his brother is like, what does he do at the company? No, really, I want to know. And no one can even answer that question. And so how do you kind of use that to kind of shift and shape into scenes differently? Because it's like at one point, he thinks he's in charge of marketing and that's what he's in charge of. And then the next moment he thinks he's the director of a commercial.
Yeah. Which, oh God, that episode, I love that episode. I always fall back to like, he's someone who's never really had to have his position challenged, right? Like deep down, Wesley knows if he was handed the keys to the company and be like, you're the CEO now, it'd be pure panic, and he would like fly to Aruba and disappear for 6 months. But the fact that he's not asked gives him the license to be like, well, I should have been, and I know better. And he knows that he's never going to get called on it, right? He's never going to actually have the control. So it's this freedom to truly float through different like aspects of the job, as you say, and then like figure like what his place can be. And but he definitely does have a confidence that whatever he is doing will help and make something better. Like he's like half searcher of like, what should I be doing? And half like, yeah, I guess like role assumer of, oh, well, I should be doing this because come on, people love me. And, there's a big disconnect of outside perception of him and what he thinks he's giving off.
And with the whole thing and his line about like, well, I turned down the job of CEO, again, it feels like he knows that everybody knows that that's not true. Like nobody's buying that. But there was that really great scene between you and Anna Gasteyer when he tells Katherine, like, by the way, I was never actually offered the job. And what's the shift that creates in him as a character, with him actually acknowledging something like that rather than trying to put on the front for her?
Yeah, I think that's a big moment for him. I think that and the gala were like two real big buybacks for him towards the end of the season, where it's kind of this acceptance where he knows he's not going to put on the facade. Now, he obviously wouldn't go up to like Dory's character or like or Elliot and be vulnerable to them. But I think like he does see a connection between him and Katherine. Like, look, like heavy is the head that wears the crown. I think like he thinks like, you're the boss in name, I'm the boss, or you're the boss in title, I'm the boss in name. So I can be open with you here and be vulnerable. And I think that's a big moment for him. Hopefully from a viewing standpoint too, where they're like, oh, he's not 100% delusional. Like he does know. It's kind of like that thing where like you see kids do it a lot too, like, or at least my daughter does it to me, where she'll say stuff that she doesn't believe, but we'll try to see like what reactions are. Like her big thing right now is to say like, I don't like you, mama and dada, but like she'll say it and be like, I don't like you, mama and dada. And like kind of like look around and see like if we're like, oh no, really? We're like, okay, all right. I think like Wesley's kind of the same. Like I was supposed to be the boss. and like kind of looks around. Everyone's like, all right, buddy. Yeah, sure. Like we're not even going to acknowledge it.
But that scene was also kind of such a great moment for him as a character as well, because he feels that connection with Katherine, but then completely misreads the situation.
Yeah.
I love the detail with the fact before he goes in to make a move on her that he puts chapstick on. Was that a scripted moment, or was that part of an alt of the scene?
No, that was scripted. This is Eric Legend wrote this episode. He's one of my really good friends. He's also like the number 2 under Spitzer on the show, and he's just Eric's so good at writing so many different types of scenes, but like that scene specifically where it feels like a middle school dance almost, like I remember reading that in the table read and being like, we were dying during that. And it felt like endless takes of that scene. And I would love to see just like a cut up of it. Like there's so many different versions, but the chapstick always made it in. I just thought it was such a funny detail.
One of the other things with the gala episode, going back to something you were saying before, that gives us so much about he probably, his own family haven't really been that nice to him growing up. They talk about him being bullied externally by other people. His own family have never believed in him, even since he was a kid. So he was kind of never propped up to begin with. Yeah. And that kind of tells us a huge amount about him. And I read something where you were saying that you think he's probably quite sad when he leaves the office and goes home at night because he's putting on this front. Was that something that you decided and determined about him very early on? And how does that influence the way that you play him during the day and a lot of the way that he's covering for that?
Yeah, I think a big part of it. And yeah, early on, that was like a big thing for him. It was, there has to be some humanity there, and there has to be the private. That's like the biggest thing in a character is like, well, what are they like privately? And you don't get to see that on a show ever because it's ensemble. So they're always with people. And I think like, I wouldn't say like very dark moments he would have, privately, but I think there are like, I think it sneaks through like a little sad, like some sad, depressed moments. And yeah, I think it's just, I think that's who he is. Like what you just said of, he never really was, pushed into acceptance by his family. Here's a guy who has it all, right? He has everything. He has all the access you could ever want, but it's still like showing that like, if you don't have the emotional support and love, the access doesn't mean anything. And like, I think he's like a product of that. And like, you just want Wesley to have like parents who love him. And like, he probably would have turned out totally fine. And yeah, you feel bad for the guy.
He also has such an overconfidence to him that again just feels like it's compensating for a lot of that inside of him, which is a great place to be able to play comedically as well. Like watching him run around the office and try to start a party and have smoke machines going and Dory DJing for him, that's all about that overcompensation again. And so does that really allow you to find a lot of comedic space to play off of kind of the overcompensation that he has for everything underneath?
100%. Yeah, it's a big character trait of him, right? Like he injects energy where I think like if he were a pure jerk or pure villain, the energy would be like cold, right? Like, but with him, it's, well, I know I can be fun. I'm at the very least, I'm a fun guy. So that's that's like ultimate crutch. It's like I can always lean into like being the person that can always get stuff going. Like, and people may say I'm annoying, but who cares because I know what I am. But yeah, that those scenes, like that scene where Michael and I got to come to the office, like make everyone dance, it's so much fun. Like specifically in Wesley's head, I think he's looking at like, he won't come down to connection point with those employees on the ground floor there. But I think he thinks like, oh, Katherine and like some other folks at the very high level may see through me and okay, that's fine. But these people who just have day-to-day jobs, they have no idea that people think I'm horrible. They think I'm a king. And to see him play in that zone it's so much fun. It's God, I mean, what a gift as an actor to get to play that, to just get to play goofy and fun and but know that in the back of your head you have status over these people as far as you think.
the stakes of what these characters are in charge of is also really fun from a comedic place as well, because going back to Superstore, it was like they had the ability to impact certain change, but they still were just a microcosm in the grand scheme of things. Whereas this is genuinely, there's the whole scene where they're like, do we recall the car? Do we just let some people die because it's cheaper for us? And what's the financial ramifications of that? And so again, that builds a great place of pressure cooker and tension. And so for you, where does a lot of the comedy come from in the fact that they're approaching these things from a granular level, and maybe they're making the right choices, but very often for the wrong reasons, and getting to kind of explore that side of it?
Yeah, it's a lot of the fun, right? And I think, like, again, Wesley's on the outsider part of that, right? Because it's just, no one's going to listen to him at the end of the day. So it's a really fun dynamic. I've described it, and so have other people, as it's the flip of Superstore. Superstore are the workers on the ground floor who are affected by the decisions of nameless people at corporate who are making their lives hell. These are now the nameless people at corporate who are making the decisions. And it is what you said is rings pretty true, which is these people often get to where they have to go, like get to the conclusions, and maybe the right choice, but very often for the wrong reasons. And I think another thing that the show highlights is there's some type of perception, I think, in high powered jobs that, would be more at the top of the ladder versus the bottom, where you think like, oh, well, people get there for, on their own merit. And it's you just work your way through the system. And by the time you get there, you belong there. Like, what you're doing. I think what the show exposes is, like, very often in corporate culture, it's not a meritocracy. It's people failing up. They just hung around, and sometimes it's easier to promote someone than it is to let them go. So I think, like, a lot of these people just existed in their job, and if you threw, like, for example, if you threw one of the floor workers in Superstore in one of these roles, I don't think they perform any better or any worse than the people that have been in those roles forever. So it's really fun to kind of, like, pick apart the corporate culture and how these decisions are made. It's what the show is, and it's what I think people will really relate to watching it.
Absolutely. And it's also so much about the interpersonal dynamics and that group dynamic as well. And within that, it's great because every episode there's kind of more of a connection and more of an establishment of what that is. And if you look at Wesley as an example of that, it's like him explaining to Dory, like, this is an open bar, the drinks are free, is a very patronizing thing on the page, but actually it's his way of being like, hey, I know this space and I've got you, and I'm gonna walk you through this. I'm gonna guide you. I'm gonna tell you, so it's like, there are ways in which he's expressing that he cares about people. Again, maybe not always in the right way. And so have you found a lot more kind of nuanced moments like that where he can start kind of expressing himself in his own Wesley way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, every cast member kind of, like, will find that, right? And it's about finding those moments. And back in the day, you used to have, like, a couple seasons of a show to kind of, like, find the footing and find those relationships, and as you're building a viewing audience, and then you use, like, the later seasons to really establish that. It's not like that anymore. It's a bit more cutthroat, where, like, you really have to define these things soon because you have to get viewers hooked. And that's what hooks viewers, right? Is seeing, like, oh, I mean, so few people watching, I think, have been in high level corporate jobs in a $1 billion industry, right? Like, that's just not, there's only a handful of those jobs, but everyone can relate to what those jobs are like or what they might be like. And then it all comes down to, like you said, finding these, interpersonal moments between the characters. And ultimately that's why this show works, I think. And that gala episode specifically, we all leave together and we're all in a limo at the end of the night. Like, we are the gang. We are the gang. And whether it's because we're forced to be together or we actually choose to be, or some combination of the both, these are the people that you're with. And these people spend more time with each other than they do with their families, probably. So I think it really is compelling and really fun to watch. And those moments of connection, like you said, the open bar moment, like showing that, like, I got you, even though it's pretty patronizing. I think that is a lot of the fun of this, right? We see the love for them build, but as we all know, the people that we love the most, we also often get the most frustrated at, right? Because we have a deeper relationship, and that's what we're building towards, and that what we will continue to build as we get to do more and more episodes.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about how one of the really fun elements of playing a character like Wesley is just the way that he's coming into these scenes and he's there trying to be part of it. And from a performance standpoint, I was interested in that dynamic and the way that you're working with scene partners, because usually so much is, okay, I'm giving something to my scene partner, they're giving something back to me, and we're kind of reacting back and forth off of each other. But you're kind of in this very unique situation where a lot of times they're just ignoring him and pretending like nothing he said even exists. And so how does that create a slightly different dynamic for you in a lot of scenes where you're kind of handing something over and then there's no reaction, but he's still continuing to like punt something their way?
Yeah, it's interesting for him. I think it is the pure id, or like the energy he's just coming out with. And in group scenes, I think you don't get a lot of Wesley doesn't get a lot of the responses he probably wants. In one-on-one, I think we all know people who are pretty like unbearable, who you run into in your everyday life, who when you have that one-on-one reaction, like as they're walking up to you, maybe like, oh shit. And then like you're in the interaction with them, but you don't get out of the interaction any sooner that you'd want. Like you're kind of at that person's disposal. And like Wesley is very much like that. He's a vacuum, and he's, I go back to that episode with Cyrus when I go into Cyrus's office and bring him into the Fun Patrol. It's just like, hey, this person is his pure energy and confidence of like, I'm pulling you in and we're going together. It's magnetic in a way where you don't want it to be. And we all know people like that who just will like suck time from us. And like, what is it? Like, why can't we pull away from these people? There's something there. I think it's because, we're hopefully at our base, we're kind, and we don't really want to like, I think because people know what Wesley is, if they were to be like, get the hell out of my office, you're annoying, I don't want to talk to you, I think they know Wesley would go and break down in tears, and they have to handle him like a child. So I think it's like they have to capitulate, and they kind of have to have those connections. That's a lot of fun of playing the character of, if it's me and Ty that I'm like abusing his time, by the time Wesley sensed that like, hey, Ty's about to throw me to the curb, I've already moved on to someone else. So he's kind of like, he's like a little cipher who moves through like different relationships, because he has the sixth sense of knowing when people are sick of him, and he moves on to someone else. And by the time he comes back around to that person, there's been a long enough break where they let him in again.
It's like a little puppy in a room full of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I've enjoyed watching your performance and everything that you've done with him as a character so much on the season so far. Thank you so much for all of this, Jon. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.